Hey homesteaders, gardeners, and cooks. My name is Jennifer. Welcome to Miles Away Farm. This morning we are making impossible pie in keeping with our pantry challenge. And that is an old Bisquick recipe that I have modified and updated for DIY home use. So we had a ham for the Christmas holiday. And this is the very last of it, and it's a great thing to add to this recipe. I saw a really funny saying the other day on a social media group that basically said, hell is two people and a ham. The idea being that it takes you forever to go through an entire ham if you're only two people, and that's pretty much where we're at here at this point. This is from a local pig. I did not cure this myself, although that is on my list of DIY homesteading things to try at some point. It's from one of our local processors. And the recipe I'm making is essentially a quiche, but without the fuss of a pie crust. And this is a recipe that Bisquick has had around forever. It was on the side of the box. I think the original one that I have printed out is Impossible Ham and Swiss Pie. But the idea is you mix in some Bisquick to the overall quiche ingredients, which is egg and dairy, and then it kind of automatically makes a bit of a crust on its own. It's not obviously the same as making a homemade pie crust, but it's also a tremendous amount less fiddly and fewer calories. Pie crust is pretty high in calories because it tends to have a lot of fat in it, because that's really what makes that crust so lovely and flaky. I don't buy Bisquick. I tend to not buy packaged ingredients like that in general, but there are lots and lots of recipes online for making it yourself with less additives and fillers, and that's what I did this morning. I'll put the recipe that I used in the description. I just kind of made it up based on some things I found online, and then also looking at the actual Bisquick nutrition label and trying to somewhat match what they had going on, but with less sugar. Surprisingly, their nutrition for regular Bisquick out of the box is not as high in fat as you would anticipate. They actually don't have a ton of fat in it, but it is quite high in sugar because they add sugar, because that's what manufacturers do when they're trying to reduce the calories on a product to make it look more appealing, but also maintain flavor. And so whenever they remove fat, they add sugar. I also looked at Alton Brown's recipe for biscuits, which is my favorite homemade biscuit recipe, and looked at his ratio of fat and flour. So it was a bit of an amalgamation of a bunch of different things. It has a little bit more fat in it than the original Bisquick does. It has less fat than a typical biscuit recipe would have. So yeah, we kind of landed at a happy medium. It looks like this. I just threw it together in my food processor. It's essentially flour, salt, baking powder, a little bit of sugar, and some shortening. You could also use lard. You could also use butter. I'm going to store this in my refrigerator to keep it, and it'll be good for 2 or 3 months. We need a third of it for this recipe, third of a cup, and so that's what that is. Quiche is essentially a custard, and it is a ratio of a minimum of 1 egg per half cup dairy, or dairy alternative if that's how you're rolling. So I'm going to use 1 cup milk and 2 eggs for my base. And these are my home chicken eggs. I've seen a lot of stuff online. I'm going to write a blog post about this, about chickens not laying this time of year and people thinking they're doing something wrong. Chickens primarily lay eggs based on their hormones, and that is controlled by day length. They have something called a pineal gland, which actually essentially measures the day length. They don't lay eggs when the days are really short, because when you think about what's the purpose of a chicken egg, the purpose of a chicken egg is to make a new chicken. You don't want to have baby chicks in the middle of winter because they will freeze to death and there's nothing for them to eat if you're in the wild. And so chickens naturally are designed to not lay eggs in the winter. However, humans like eggs in the winter, and so we've spent a lot of time trying to breed for chickens that can lay eggs in the winter, and then we've also come up with ways of getting them to lay, like putting artificial light in their coop. That definitely will work. But some chickens will only lay less than 200 eggs a year, and other chickens will lay 250 to 300 eggs a year, and so the breed that you have makes a huge difference in terms of how much your chickens are going to lay in the wintertime. I rotate between black sex length Gold Sex Linked and Rhode Island Reds. For the most part, I have some other fun, fancy breeds just because it's fun to have them around. But for my primary egg laying, those are the 3 breeds that I rotate between. And they all lay more than 250 eggs a year and closer to 300. All right, I'm gonna add in my biscuit mix here. Yeah, so if you want more eggs, get a breed of chicken that lays more eggs. That's the short version. It helps if you're in the South. If you're further south, your day length is not going to be nearly as short. Ours gets down to about 8 hours in the dead of winter. And so that makes a huge difference. So I'm just going to mix in my Bisquick here, and I'll give this one more stir before I pour it, just so that stuff isn't in the bottom. And I could do this raw. I am going to saute these onions off just a little bit because I have a feeling they're not going to cook. I am really, really not a fan of raw onion. I pick them off of salads. I pick them off of hamburgers. So I don't want this to have a raw onion flavor where it's just gotten warmed up and it hasn't actually gotten cooked. So I'm going to saute these. And we'll grate some cheese while I'm waiting on that. The beauty of this is it is just like a quiche in that you can just use it as a fridge clean out. These are homegrown bell peppers from this summer. I use these year round, especially, except for that 3 months during the summer when I'm actually getting them fresh. And I freeze them in gallon bags, and I have 2 or 3 of these in my freezer right now. It is fantastic. It is the #1 reason I grow bell peppers, because being able to have homegrown bell peppers this time of year is so great. And I don't do anything to them other than chop them and throw them in the freezer. I don't blanch them, nothing. I'm going to give this just a little bit of salt to help that onion sweat. And then once this gets going a bit, I will add in those peppers and take the edge off of those as well, so they're not going in frozen. I think a little Monterey Jack cheese is going to be good in this. I need about a cup of cheese, which is 4 ounces. And I'm going to try to keep the plastic bag around this so my hands aren't touching it, because that is what's going to keep this cheese from getting moldy quickly. That should be good enough. All right, getting a little bit of color on those, not a bad thing. I'm going to cool this pan down by throwing in some frozen peppers. I have my oven preheated to 400. I'm going to throw my ham in here just to get a little sear on it. Why not? Since I've already got the pan dirty. Essentially what I'm making is a Denver omelet quiche. I am going to grease my pan here. And then last but not least, just because we could really use some greens in our diet, I'm going to throw in a nice handful of spinach. Broccoli would also be really good. If you have frozen broccoli in your freezer, this would be yummy. You could throw in, if you had shredded spinach in your freezer, that would also be good. All right, that's good enough. We just needed to get that spinach wilted. Get every bit of in the pool here. That looks great. I'm going to add our cheese. think the original recipe was ham and Swiss. I almost never have Swiss cheese. I like it, but I don't buy it very often. Monterey Jack is going to be lovely and melty. There you go. And give this one more good stir. Make sure all of that flour hasn't just sunk to the bottom and gets left behind. And into the oven this goes for 35 to 40 minutes. It's been 35 minutes. Let's see how our crustless quiche is looking. That looks gorgeous. So there you go. We're gonna let that cool for 5 minutes or so, and we're ready for a late breakfast. So this has been cooling for just 5 minutes or so, just enough to let it deflate a little bit. And I'm just going to do 4 big wedges because this is breakfast. And it doesn't form like a really distinct crust, but you do get a little bit of an edge here that would not be there if this was just quiche without the Bisquick. So this is always the tricky bit. Oh, that's not too bad. And you can see how that stuck a little bit. That is why I sprayed that pan. Don't forget to do that. You can see that little bit of crust there. That is what that Bisquick brings you. All right, tribe. So there you have it. Really quick breakfast quiche without all the hassle of making a crust. Highly recommend it. And because I made a couple of cups of DIY Bisquick mix, I can now make this 4 more times without a lot of hassle because this is already to go. And it's ingredients that I want in here and that I can control. This is locally ground wheat. You could easily make this with a whole wheat flour or a half and half with whole wheat and white flour. I'm controlling the amount of sugar that's in here. I'm controlling the specific shortening that's in here. You could make this with lard. You could make this with butter. So you have 100% control over the ingredients and of course no preservatives. So really fun, really easy DIY impossible pie from Bisquick. Give it a try. If you like this kind of content, give me a thumbs up, subscribe, and leave me a comment. We'll see you next time. I have new videos coming out every week.